5 minutes on the clock. Open and ready. Okay, so let me start. Judge, ready? Ready? Okay, start now. So, thank you, Judge, for being here. Thank you for opening my dear, beautiful opener for being here. This is an amazing round, and I'm glad to debate you. So, Judge, the topic for today's debate is the U.S. needs another Jimmy Carter. And my name is Affirmative, and I'm F on this topic. So, I'd like to start by defining something that the U.S. refers to the United States needs. That's something that ought to be another, possibly a replacement or a better form of. And Jimmy Carter happens to be the previous president who just passed away. We saw as a perfect peace, the late president Jimmy Carter. So my weight mechanism will be more true than false. So my first contention is extra polarization. Judge, what do we see now? Subpoint A, what do we see now? What we can see now is that there seems to be great division among the U.S. population. Great division among the U.S. and its neighboring countries. An example being China. Judge, Jimmy Carter was the president who served he began the military deployment that helped defeat the Soviet Union. A power that was troublesome to the world, he began to organize the military and deploy them to defeat the Soviet Union, which was a power then, and also normalize relationships with international, with countries such as China. And what do we see now? China, US is at war and is at the brink of what collapse. No country can exist on its own. China has become a world superpower, whether we agree or not. It makes sense that we liaise with them, we work with them for the betterment of the US and for the betterment of Chinese as well. Because not only are we having Americans in China, but a lot of Chinese happen to be in America. If this relationship is to collapse, what will happen to individuals? Judge, China is going to be a major supporter of US economic relationships and economic businesses if the relationship is worked on well. Something Jimmy Carter made sure happened. My second contention is no adults in the room. With regards to my second contention, the current president, sorry to say, sometimes behaves a bit childishly. And a common example is a statement he made is that he grabs women by the P word. Something I don't want to mention. He grabs women by the P word. Imagine the president of a country, someone who we have voted for, decide to lead the country, opens their mouth to say something like this. How safe do you think a woman will feel like? How safe do you think a woman will feel? Jimmy Carter was described as a gentleman, that is from the oxfordnews.com, and would not utter such words. And such words are not meaningful in communication. In fact, our current president went ahead to what? Pardon a genuine set variants, supporters. People who decide to upset the constitution, he went ahead to what? Give them the free pardon. Do we actually need such a person in presidency? Jimmy Carter would never have done. In fact, Jimmy Carter is known to be the president who made sure law and order was informed, which is sourced from the academicpress.com. So that he sought what and ensured what law and order was apparent and what common in the society. This brings me to my third contention this brings me to my subpoint C, or my second contention, which is debates. Presidential debates are a playground for bullies currently. If you look at the last any presidential debate, in fact, it was, how do I say it? It was a comedy show. Instead of people, the leaders we want to lead our country, sitting down and making decisions or bringing up policies that would think about and say, okay, I want to vote for him. One president who happens to be the president now was saying they're eating cats and dogs in other states, hence we shouldn't vote for this candidate. Do we think such a president is fit to lead? Would Jimmy Carter have done that? Exactly not. And in fact, the Congress has become a playground where these words were used for a fellow congresswoman. That's a bleached, blonde, bad butch built body was said in Congress towards another congresswoman. Disrespect blatantly in one of the most important places of the country, in the Congress, in the state. Judge, in Jimmy Carter's president, it was seen that, and this is from the academicpress.org, that the unfavorable view of opposing parties and respect for opposing parties, the disrespect for opposing parties, then in 1994 was 59%, and now it's what, at 88%. In 1994 was 64% for Democrats and 87%. And this been my last contention, where he represented both peace and he integrated what, the society, a man of peace, and was able to what, lead a better presidency even after Nixon's great Watergate scandal. With all this, I believe the Runs will be voted in favor of the F. Thank you. Cross-X.
All right. I have. Turn the sound on. I have 2 minutes on my clock. Judge, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
2 minutes. I'm going to start that time. Great speech. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with some questions. So what we're talking about in the context of like needing another Jimmy Carter, can we look at what Jimmy Carter was like during his presidency? I think I saw some of that from your case.
Okay, so for my case, we can see that he was a problem solver with regards to maintain international relationships.
Yeah.
He helped maintain relationships and started even the normalized international relationships with China, which happens to be a world superpower now. And unfortunately, Donald Trump, the current president, seems to be in the direction of destroying it. He was a reformer and also a man of peace and set the president for law and justice in the society, something which we are not seeing.
Right.
The United States riot, the president is saying you can decide to overthrow the constitution and I would what?
Right.
Append to it. Jimmy Carter wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. And then, so your definition of need, can you remind me of what that is again?
Need, my definition of needs is something that ought to be done and must be done.
Okay.
Or a better replacement. With regards to this,
Yeah.
to this, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And then, so you talk about extra polarization. Is that just kind of looking at the context of what the states is happening now?
We are looking at what is currently happening now. Yes, happening now, yes.
Okay. And so it's your assertion that by having Jimmy Carter, or another Jimmy Carter, are we saying another Jimmy Carter is president?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Someone with his steady, with his level of intelligence, and who could be an example like him in our present society.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. I don't really have a whole lot of time left, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop my timer there. Thank you so much. All right. Ooh, got it. All right. I have. There we go. 6 minutes on my clock. Jojo, you ready? Mm-hmm. Anaconda? Okay, gonna go ahead and start that time. Oh. All right, hey there you guys. My name is Mason Price and I'm here with Union University today, standing in firm negation of this resolution, the U.S. needs another Jimmy Carter. Now Judge, ultimately what we're looking at here is talking about like a new Jimmy Carter as the president. We established that in cross-examination. So I think what we need to do is kind of analyze Jimmy Carter's run as president. What did it look like for him? How did people like it? And then also we can even analyze his actions afterwards because he was super involved in different policies and governmental things after he was president to really determine whether or not the U.S. needs another one of him. So one thing I will go ahead and say, and you'll hear me say this again later, but I think we can both agree that maybe the current state of what's going on in the U.S. is not the most positive. It can be kind of discouraging at times, but what my assertion is today is that regardless of what the U.S. looks like right now, we don't need another Jimmy Carter. We're looking for something different, for something better. That isn't what Jimmy Carter was. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with some responses to my opponent's case. Now, my opponent's first contention they bring up is this idea of extra polarization. Essentially, we're living in kind of a society where polarization is at an all-time high, and Judge, I truly cannot, I can't say anything against that. That's just true. What I can say, though, is that having another Jimmy Carter would just make this significantly worse. Way, way worse. Why? Well, subpoint A is because in his presidency, he was not well loved. And we're going to get into that, looking at his different economic policies, looking at his different, diplomatic policies and how he was interacting with other countries. At the end of the day, people actually were not really loving Jimmy Carter. And in fact, he was not voted in for a second term. He ran for the presidency again, and they didn't vote for him. In fact, he lost in a landslide. And that's because people weren't really loving him. But subpoint B is after his presidency, things got really bad. Things got really icky. So this is from the nationalreview.com, talking about how Jimmy Carter worked really hard, this is after his presidency, against President George W. Bush's efforts against Saddam Hussein, and even urged the UN by making and this is in quotes, a direct appeal to hold a good faith negotiation with Saddam Hussein before entering upon the war. Now, I know I recognize that name, and you may recognize it as well, but Saddam Hussein was just a really bad guy. He took part in leading things like genocides and things over in the Middle East. And ultimately, this wasn't a good guy, but Jimmy Carter was doing a lot to try to help him out. We see even further from the National Review, just 5 days before a deadline that had been set for Saddam to withdraw, Carter wrote to key Arab leaders, urging them to abandon their support for the U.S., undermining months of careful diplomacy by the Bush administration. So ultimately, Judge, we're seeing that Jimmy Carter was making a lot of decisions that really weren't necessarily in the interest of the American people. Really, they were just kind of in his own interest, and that's really what would cause a lot more polarization. But we'll see that in my own case. Then my opponent talks about how, well, there's no adults in the room. Looking at the status right now, he brings up some really horrible statements and quotes from some different members of our government. And Judge, my response to this is ultimately that's a bad thing. And what I'm advocating for today is not that we keep the status quo, but that we don't need another Jimmy Carter. We ought not to. We must not have another Jimmy Carter. So this leads me to my own case. My first contention you can tag is the U.S. right now. What's going on right now? What would Jimmy Carter really be affecting? Well, subpoint A, Russia, right? There's the war between Russia and Ukraine, and we've done a lot to really kind of interact with that, and Jimmy Carter would have a big hand in that. Subpoint B, the Middle East. Ultimately, the Middle East, there's also a lot going there. We're looking at the Hamas war, the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and all the different things we're seeing there. Ultimately, we're seeing lots of invasions, we're seeing lots of Middle East problems, kind of things that Jimmy Carter dealt with himself. And subpoint C is economy. I think we can all agree, I mean, ideally, I think we, for the most part, live in the States right now, is that the economy is something that's kind of scary and something we want to get better instead of worse. And ultimately, Jimmy Carter would not make things better. But this leads me to my own to my second contention, contention 2 of the U.S. back then. Well, subpoint A is looking at Russia, right? So how did Jimmy Carter affect what was going on with Russia then? Well, this is from the millercenter.org saying that Carter did not, let me repeat, did not advocate against human rights violations of the Soviet Union. So there were some issues going on. The Soviet Union was partaking in human rights violations. Jimmy Carter didn't advocate against it. He just didn't say anything. And Judge, that's a really huge issue, especially looking at the political climate today. Subpoint B, though, is the Middle East. And this is from National Security Archive, talking about how one of the epic foreign policy disasters Jimmy Carter faced was the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan. We see that from Military Watch magazine that while Jimmy Carter was in office, we saw it began the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan. Administration oversaw the arming and training of Islamist insurgents against the Soviet government. And Judge, I want to point out that this arming and training of Soviet Islamist insurgents ended up leading to kind of this creation of the Taliban. There is a huge link, and you're going to see this from lots of different experts, that Jimmy Carter had a huge hand in helping to create the Taliban. But further, let's look at the economy. So we're seeing those are big issues that Jimmy Carter is not going to help us with. In fact, it's probably going to make things worse. But also our economy right here at home is going to get worse. This is from nationalreview.com, seeing that when Jimmy Carter took the presidential oath in 1977, the unemployment rate was a high 7.5%. When he was voted out, let me remind you, he didn't last. When he was voted out in 1981, it was just as high. He didn't fix things. But inflation at a 5.7% when he was in office went up each year he was in office and was at a 13.5% when he was voted out. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't need another Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter is actually going to do a lot of harm to the things that we need help with. We need somebody who's better than him. So for those reasons, I strongly urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Minutes on the clock. 2 minutes. Start. Okay. Thank you, Governor, for such a wonderful speech. But I'd like you to clarify a couple of things for me. Can you tell me about your contentions, the taglines, please?
Yes. So my first contention is the U.S. right now. Do you want subpoints as well?
Yes, the subpoint.
Yeah. Subpoint A was Russia. Subpoint B was the Middle East.
Okay.
And subpoint C was economy.
Okay.
And then my second contention was the U.S. back then, and it's the same exact subpoint. So Russia, Middle East, economy.
Okay. So you said that he helped train what Islamic insurgents. That's what you said.
Yes.
And these people have led to the Taliban.
Yes.
And are you sure what source is saying that these are the people that actually led to the Taliban?
Right. This is from Military Watch magazine. This article was published on December 31st of 2024.
And can I share that line again?
Yeah, do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
So it talks about how he began the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan and how the administration oversaw the arming and training of Islamist insurgents against the Soviet Union, which paved the way for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Okay, so it paved the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for using that word. Paved the way. Okay. And you mentioned that during his time, the unemployment, when he came to power, was at which rate, please?
So the unemployment, specifically unemployment, was at a really high rate and it stayed the exact same. He didn't do anything to fix it, and then inflation actually got significantly higher.
Okay. And has inflation got even worse now than before?
Inflation probably is pretty bad now. I don't know a whole lot about economics, but I think we can assume that if inflation raised every year he was in office, then it would probably be the same.
And do you know of any role Jimmy Carter played in regards to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, helping resolve international conflicts? Was he somebody who was pro-resolving these conflicts?
Right. I don't have any specifics on whether or not his motivations were to solve, but I do have that he made things worse.
Okay.
Oh, did I leave my pen in here? Sorry.
Judge, ready? Opponent ready?
Hmm?
Okay. So, I'd like to start now. Thank you, opponent, for such a wonderful speech. Judge, I'd like to start by addressing a couple of things my opponent said. Let's say that my opponent agrees that the U.S. is currently in shambles. That's one thing beautiful that she agrees with. She agrees with what the fact that there's extra polarization, and said that he was not well loved, and after his presidency, per her own words, things got worse. And that if things get worse after your presidency, you can't attribute that to him. Because per your own words, God was after, not during. So if you leave office and something happens during another president's office, you can't attribute it to the one who's left. He's not in office anymore. If things are getting worse, you can't attribute that to him. But what she said, she agrees with the fact there was extra polarization. And Judge, I clearly mentioned that what Jimmy Carter helped what? The help in the destruction of the Soviet Union, which happened to be a superpower and was extending taking over countries like what Russia, Ukraine is happening now. Russia trying to overtake Ukraine. That was what the Soviet Union was trying to do then. He spearheaded the movement that eventually led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and also normalized relations with China, a country that the US is currently battling with diplomatic issues with. Something he spearheaded and made sure what these relations were formalized and normalized. We're going to mention the issue of we also mentioned that the issue of Xi working with Saddam Hussein. And Judge, I would say that you disregard this one because my opponent doesn't bring any fact to support such a statement. And I would say this is an allegation and probably a conjecture. And she also mentioned the fact that during his presidency, as I said, things got worse. Judge, at this point, I'd like to deal with my opponent's contention. The first contention is what is going on right now, Russia, Ukraine. He helped in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. He wouldn't have permitted, in fact, watch Russia invade Ukraine and have stepped in to ensure that this event don't happen. My opponent also talked about Middle Eastern problems. And I would like to say that the Israel-Palestinian war, which started many years ago, Jimmy Carter set a precedent for peace, where he got both parties to sit together to have a momentary amount of peace for a couple of years. And after his office, this event, the war started again. And this is from the oxfordnews.com. And my next point for what she said was that he dealt with the economy. Judge, my opponent doesn't give significant numbers with relation to economy getting worse. As you can see, we're going to ask a concern on unemployment. She said that it remained the same. In fact, unemployment now is worse than it was even before the president, before Biden, and before even Trump. Unemployment is just getting worse. Opponent mentioned the fact that he did not advocate against civil rights abuse, of which I do not agree. I think it should be disregarded. Opponent tries to talk about extra polarization, which she agrees with, and no adults in the room, which she totally agrees with as well. Thank you.
I've got 3 in my pocket because I will forget I have them and I'll get nervous and put another one in there and then I find it later and I'm like, oh, oopsie. All right, I have, there we go. 5 minutes on my clock. Judge, if you're ready. And opponent?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start my time. Oh. All right, hey there you guys, it's me again. Now, Judge, what I'm gonna do in this speech, well, the first thing I wanna do is thank you for being here, and thank you to my opponent. We genuinely could not do this without you. I know today's been crazy, the running around has been crazy, so we're really grateful that you're here. And yeah, and thank you to Ephraim. This has been such a fun round. I always really enjoy debating you, and so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. Now, what I'm gonna do in this speech is I'm going to give you some voting issues. And so these are going to directly address a lot of the main points that my opponent just brought forward. And I feel that kind of by sticking right here, ending right here, we can wrap up this round really nicely, tie it up, put a little bow on it, and move on with our days pretty well. These are just reasons, Judge, why you can feel comfortable voting for, in my case today, the negation. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. So my first voter, you can tag as, the US may need help. Sure, that's true, we can agree on that. The US might need some help. We're seeing kind of some willy-nilly things happen all over the place. Some really horrible things being said, past, present, just about women or other minorities or things to that extent. So yeah, we can agree that the US may need help. I mean, we have invasion issues, and this isn't the US specifically, but let's look at Russia and Ukraine. Look at the invasion of Ukraine and how that is a huge deal and how we really need that to be handled in a way that's delicate and that helps the most amount of people, right? We also have war issues, right? We're looking at Israel and Palestine and how there's a lot of war going on and a lot of conflict, and things are not really getting better. We're not seeing things cool off, we're seeing things get kind of scary. And ultimately, Judge, these are huge things that need to be addressed and need to be taken care of. But past that, past what's going on overseas, what's happening right here, right now, looking at this kind of polarization with these economy issues. We're seeing prices go up faster maybe than they have before. I don't know. I guess my parents could afford a house when they were my age or thought they could. And now I'm here and I'm kind of nervous and I'm like, I have to grow up. And ultimately, it's getting kind of freaky, kind of scary. And so the US might need help. But this leads me to my second voter, but not from Jimmy Carter. Let's not use Jimmy Carter. And why is that? Well, Judge, looking at these key issues that we have, these invasion issues, war issues, and economy issues, these are all things that Jimmy Carter kind of dealt with throughout his presidency and even after. And what we find is that every time that Jimmy Carter came face to face with one of those things, he made a poor decision. Not just a decision that was bad just for the moment, like, oh man, but I mean like setting up the Taliban, setting up Al-Qaeda, these organizations that did a lot of harm in their communities and others. And so ultimately, that's why we don't need Jimmy Carter. But when we're looking at not from Jimmy Carter, so point A, I want to remind you of this lack of advocacy. When we're talking about invasions and we're talking about the things that are going on right now, Jimmy Carter is not going to advocate for us like my opponent leads you to believe. And this is from the millercenter.org. Once again, when we're talking about these things that were going on, Carter did not advocate against human rights violations of the Soviet Union. He failed to halt the sale of military supplies. Judge, ultimately, he was more or less supporting it, even if not by saying anything at all. Because what we want at the end of the day is for, I guess, good things to be upheld, right? We want to see justice. We want to see what we feel should happen. But Jimmy Carter isn't going to help us out with that. So point B is helping the bad guys. Not only was he just not advocating for the good stuff, he was like actively helping the bad people, right? And this is looking at Military Watch magazine once again, so showing how the Carter administration oversaw the arming and training of Islamist insurgents against the Soviet government, and how that paved the way for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Further, showing how just 5 days, this is for National Review, showing how just 5 days before a deadline that had been set for Saddam Hussein, once again, to withdraw, Carter wrote to key Arab leaders urging them to abandon their support for the U.S. This undermined the months of careful diplomacy that the Bush administration had put in to really try to solve that issue and solve that conflict. Jimmy Carter worked directly against that problem. He was helping the bad guys, Judge. But further, subpoint C, hurting the economy. When we're talking about right here at home, maybe you can forgive, okay, like that's overseas, we don't have to look at it. It doesn't deal with me, but we're talking about right here, the money that's in your pocket and how you kind of move through life. Jimmy Carter took the presidential oath in 1977. The unemployment rate was a high 7.5%. Now, my opponent is going to say, well, yeah, but it's also high right now. Yeah, that's true. And what we want is to see it get better. But under Jimmy Carter, things didn't change, especially in terms of unemployment. And we're talking about inflation, which we're also seeing at an all-time high. Things got significantly worse. It went from a 5.7% when he was in office and went up each year that he was in office and was at a 13.5% when he was voted out. At the end of the day, Judge, this is my third voter, what I'm advocating for is that the U.S. needs something, sure, but the U.S. does not need another Jimmy Carter. For those reasons, I strongly urge a negative ballot. Thank you so much.
Minutes on the clock. Ready, Judge? Okay. So, thank you for such a wonderful speech, and thank you, Judge, for being here. So, I'd like to start by addressing a couple of things my opponent said. She agrees with the fact that U.S. may need help, which I totally agree. And she also says the economy gets worse, but not from Jimmy Carter. Judge, my response to this is, who would you prefer to solve a problem for you? Someone who has a history of solving problems, or someone who has a history of making things worse? I believe we go for someone who has a history of solving problems. And these problems is solved by international relations, by making sure that the China-US relation was formalized and what became a standard that now we're benefiting from. It's even getting worse now. We wouldn't vote for Trump or Biden because they actually made it worse. What did it also do? Ensure that the Soviet Union collapsed. My opponent talks about the fact that he didn't speak against Soviet Union abuse, but if I support something, why would I put in the work to make sure it collapses? Doesn't make sense. If something is happening and I act on a word and I'm supporting it, why would I actually gather people, military forces, to support the dissolution of it? Of course he was against it. That's why I'm sure he organized the military, like, let's dissolve these people because they are invading other countries, and Russia, Ukraine, but that is happening now. Wouldn't have happened in the days of what? Jimmy Carter. Open also talks about the issue of what? Training of and arming of what? Islamic jihadis. And my response to that is speculation and conjecture. It is true they may have what? Sent weapons to train a particular group of people to fight against the Soviet Union. But you can't say those group of people are the ones who eventually led what? To the whole jihadist and extremist movement coming about. No. Training me to become a skilled soldier doesn't mean I'm going to be the one to go back home to my country and overthrow the government. Those are two different things. I may possess the skill, the knowledge, but that does not necessarily mean that when I go back to my country in West Africa, I'm going to overthrow my government. Saying that because I'm trained, I'm going to do that, is just pure speculation and conjecture. My opponent also mentioned the issue of what Saddam Hussein, and one thing I wanted to ask her was, why did the president seek that the US should not be supported in that removal of Saddam Hussein? I'm sure he had more reasons why my opponent, if she knew, she wouldn't have brought that point. Now, coming to my voters, my first voter is someone with experience. Jimmy Carter showed experience in what? The dissolution of the Soviet Union. He showed experience in what? Formalizing international relations with China, a superpower now that actually we're on the brink of losing and going to now going on trade wars with China, Canada, and Mexico and other countries, which shouldn't be. My second voter is a better leader, which Jimmy Carter showed, and as my opponents agreed, is somebody that wouldn't have allowed what this disrespectful comments to be made in public. And the third voter is drop points. She didn't address the Watergate scandal and the issue of him being a great leader after Nixon. With all this, I believe that the round should be voted in favor of the act. Thank you, Judge.
Yay, last round!
Last round.
Get in there. Hooray.
Oh, gosh. Do you do handshakes? Do you do handshakes? This round is tiring.
I'm really bad about leaving my phone in competition. Great job.
Good job.
Judge, thank you. I know this isn't yet.
Judge?
Go ahead and erase this right.
So, this is the last round for today, and for today's first session of the first 6 rounds, and we're done, and it's amazing Price being the last person I debated. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.